Welcome back. If anybody else is going to come. Okay, so this session is on housing options for intergenerational communities. So in our panel we have, just one second, Barry Light, who's an attorney in the town of Huntington. Barry practices area including commercial law, finance, and real estate. The other panelist, Alyssa Kyle. She's from Vision of Long Island. Alyssa is a placemaking director of Vision of Long Island with close to 20 years in experience in architectural design, town planning, community visions, workshop, and walkable street designs. She focuses on human skills, traditional design with a strong sense of place, and is also currently a member of the Huntington Historic Preservation Commission. The third panelist is Trudy Fitzsimmons. Trudy has held diverse leadership roles and volunteer across Long Island for over 40 years. She's a co-founder of Synchronicity Planning and Communication, as well as co-chair of the board of Vision of Long Island, Smart Growth Planning Organization. Previously, she was the program director of leadership of Huntington and a director of Huntington Township Housing Coalition. So, good morning. Same process as before. We have two ladies on the side with cards to ask any questions, and get started. Barry?
Sure. Good. It's still morning. Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Barry Lights, and as Vita said, I am an attorney in the town of Huntington. My principal focus in terms of practice is real estate law, both commercial and residential. But I'm really here with a different hat because I'm also chairman of the Huntington Housing Authority. For those of you who don't know, the Huntington Housing Authority is an agency of HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Agency. But it is run by town residents. All of the commissioners of the Huntington Housing Authority are appointed by the town board. I've been serving as a commissioner for the last 6 years, and this year I became chairman of the Housing Authority. And the Housing Authority's mission is to create affordable housing opportunities in Huntington, for Huntington residents, for people living in Huntington. And some would say that affordable housing in Huntington is a bit of an oxymoron. When you have apartments that rent for what you could get an apartment for in New York City, it's not quite affordable. And so that's a problem in this area. But it's not restricted to this area. And I'm going to give you an example. You've all heard recently that Amazon is now going to be part of its headquarters in Long Island City in Queens. The immediate area where they're going to be located, the median income is $128,000. The median income. But for Long Island City as a whole, it has been designated as a federal opportunity zone, which under federal law gives builders incentives and so forth for building housing. And you would think that it would be for an economically depressed area. And that's because Long Island City, the greater Long Island City, is also home to one of the largest, if not the largest, public housing developments called Queensbridge. And the median income at Queensbridge is $22,000. Now, the housing stock in that development is not something that we would want here. I mean, you've heard the stories about the New York City Housing Authority and the problems that they've been having and the imminent possibility that they might be taken over by the feds. But that's the spectrum. And that's a gross example, an extreme example of economic diversity. And so when we talk about intergenerational housing options, we're really talking about diversity in economics, right? I mean, that's because young people starting out, they don't have a lot of money. Older folks who are living on limited incomes don't have a tremendous amount. And in an environment where you've got expensive housing stock, you've got expensive taxes, you've got to figure out options where people can actually stay in their homes. One of the areas of my practice has been foreclosure defense. I, with a number of other attorneys, founded what's called the Suffolk County Bar Association's Foreclosure Project, where Suffolk County lawyers give of their time freely to counsel those who are under the threat of foreclosure in Suffolk County. And one of the things that I tell people all the time is that when you're trying to negotiate a modification of your mortgage, there are 4 pieces of income that the banks are looking for to qualify you for a mortgage modification. So obviously W-2 income, paychecks, your retirement benefits, profit and loss if you've got your own business, contributions from third parties, and the last one is rental income, because banks will qualify rental income as part of your income if you can show that. And the banks, for their part, don't care if the rental is legal. They just want to know that there's regular income coming in. But as we all know from the last panel, the towns, the local municipalities, including this one, do care about rental legalities and safety, which is a fair point. But the point is that there are some people who rely on rental income in order to stay in their homes, in order to pay their mortgages, in order to exist in where they've lived for years and years. And so that's something that we have to be creative about. But back to the Housing Authority, we have a number of programs that promote affordable housing. We have obviously the voucher program. We also have something that I'm particularly proud of, what's called the FSS program, the Financial Self-Sufficiency Program, where we combine job training, economic sufficiency, as well as housing training to people who are looking to become owners as opposed to renters. And they, as they contribute money to a fund, we will match those funds so that they can get to a point where they can afford that down payment for a home as opposed to renting for the rest of their lives. There's also, as you may have seen out in the lobby, one of the Housing Authority's developments is Millennium Hills, right near the Canon headquarters. It is a very innovative project in that it is a combination of affordable owned units and rental units. So the Housing Authority manages the rental units, but the owned units are affordable and will stay affordable in perpetuity. So when someone sells, the buyer has to qualify for affordable housing. It is an interesting project because it does combine owners and renters. I'm not going to say that it's perfect. There are issues that come up in terms of renters versus owners, because as we all know, it's a different perspective when you're renting as opposed to owning. But it does work, and it does provide affordable options in terms of home buyers. Another project which is very interesting, not a housing authority, but the Rule and Road project, which is a limited ownership cooperative, where people basically rent to own. They pay into the maintenance fees, and it goes to their ownership, and they can sell, but it's a limited amount of profit that they can realize from that sale. So, in terms of economic diversity, and which is really what generational diversity is, we have to be more creative in our options, because the people on either ends of the spectrum of economics are being left out in the cold, and we've got to understand and maybe make some legal accommodations for people in those pockets, because the people in the middle will always be able to take care of themselves in this environment, but it's those that are on either end that we need to really preserve and protect. Thanks.
Thank you, Barry. Trudy?
I'm Trudy Fitzsimmons. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm co-chair of Vision Long Island, and I've been involved with the Huntington community for over 40-some years, close to 45 years. I can't afford to live here. That's why I don't anymore. I had to move to Smithtown because my husband and I had looked and looked, and when we sold our home, we didn't really think about it until we started looking for someplace else and went, oh my. And our children are here, our grandchildren are here. Fortunately, we were only in Smithtown, so that was not too difficult. It's close. But that's something that a lot of people struggle with. We had to, in order to sell our home, we had to bring everything up to today's standards. Nobody wants to buy it and then put another $100,000 in to fix up bathrooms and kitchens and whatnot. So you're left with, well, okay, now that I'm retired, our income is not going to increase. So in 10 years, when that kitchen and that bathroom is now too old, now what do we do? Where do we come up with $30,000 or $40,000 to make those changes again? So you're kind of faced with the prospect that you have to either sell the house so that you don't encourage debt, or get your money out of your investment, which that's what it kind of is, or you're just, you have to move. So we decided, let's sell. We didn't, when we had the house, we had 4 kids, 2 grandmothers who came through, and a number of the kids came back and went out again, which I'm sure is, it's a story that a lot of people have in common. So we made that decision based on that. Then there's always life changes. Nothing ever stays the same. So when you go forward, a year ago, my husband passed away. So now, not only were we on limited, we had Social Security and veterans benefits, but now they come around and say, oh, your husband passed away, so now we're going to cut everything. So you get less Social Security, less benefits, and we didn't live lavishly. We kind of average people, So it's there you are faced again with, okay, now where do I move? We found a place that was affordable, but not in Huntington, and so now where do I go? You have, I don't know, there's a few choices here. Palmanok Village, which is something that is HUD subsidized, I believe, and my mother lived there for 25 years, and I suppose I'm going to have to put my name in, but I don't know how many years I'm going to have to wait to get in there. I think we're going to reverse things. We're going to soon have, instead of the kids living in the parents' basements, now the parents are going to go back and live in the kids' basements. Yep. And I'm praying, because I only have one who has a house. The other ones, they rent, or they live with another parent. So here, these are all these changes we're faced with, and the community doesn't move that fast. When you talk about housing, I've been involved with housing for, has to be more than 20 years at this point with Vision, since 1997. And you see changes, but they're very slow. And people don't really want to get into this. And most people can't afford to go to all these meetings and get all this information. That's why I'm thrilled they're being taped, because they'll be able to be viewed by somebody at some time and get this information. People understand so many things are connected. You want to stay in a community. I've been a volunteer in this community for over 45 years. And I like to think I've helped do a lot of good things, but I can't live here, so it's expensive for me to run back and forth if I do want to stay involved with things. We're not doing things in a timely fashion. We're not thinking about balance, and I'm glad to hear our supervisors talking about expediting things for builders and developers. It's very expensive to build, and then your costs are high to be able to have people rent these places. It's not that it costs a lot of money. I know they're fixing up the apartments where I live, and I'm going, oh boy, they're going to raise my rent, here it goes. And that's one of the factors that adds to it. So that's why for years I've been trying to, put information out there and work with Vision and work with communities and say, hello, our kids need houses they can afford, and so do the old people. So that's my 2 cents, and thank you all for your patience.
Thank you, Trudy. Trudy's story is one of so many in our town and other towns. Like Trudy, I've been involved in the community, so I talk to people. So it's not just the housing, parenthood, children, it's also the income. You know, some of these apartments that they're considered affordable housing, you know, rentals, they're a mortgage payment. My son was 30 years old, who happened to be fortunate to be able to purchase a home, but it's not just the mortgage. It's your down payment, it's your income, it's the taxes. So it's not just one item in the puzzle, it's the puzzle with many pieces. So like Trudy says, you know, you always got to plan for the future, but not for your children, but also for yourself, because I'm going to be in the same situation as Trudy is. My daughter lives with me. I live in Huntington. I want to stay here, but I don't know for how long can I afford, you know, to live where I live. You know, taxes keep on going up. My income is my income. If I retire, I can't live here. So there's a lot of things in our community, and like Trudy said, we're glad we're here and we hear information, but a lot of our people do not go to town hall meetings. They don't know what really is going on, what the real issues are. So I think information and all these town hall meetings that are being taped, and I hope people have access and see it, so what really goes on in our town. And we want to stay here. We don't want to move. Same thing with Long Island City. It's the same thing. I have family that lives there, and I heard the same comments. But you know, everything is tied together. Income, either it could be pension, business rental, you know, there's always a change in life, and I think we need to move a little bit faster than what we're doing right now, and a lot of the red tape. And I'm glad some of the programs that our new supervisor, you know, with the board have put in place are working. I hope we see more of this, so we could move faster and we could stay here. I don't want to move. So, Alyssa.
Yes, can you start the presentation? Thanks. I'm going to talk about something that's a little, I guess, pushing the envelope. We're talking about housing opportunities and diversity of incomes and that sort of thing. And I'm going to talk about kind of the diversity of housing options that maybe we aren't utilizing as much as we could. This concept called missing middle housing, which I'll get into what that is in just a second. Looking at what types of housing could be built that could maybe help facilitate getting more housing available at various price points a little more affordably. Now, what do we have? We've got lots of single-family homes. You know, that's Levittown right there. You know, we've got lots of that. And then at some point we realized, well, okay, not everyone's needs a 4-bedroom house. Maybe we need some apartments for some folks. So then we started building garden apartments. But then we made sure they were still very auto-oriented. We built them on the side of highways, and we called them suburbia, in case anyone thought that, you know, there was something remotely urban about that. That's a real place in Farmingdale, by the way. And then more recently, we've started doing transit-oriented types of developments in downtowns. This one is in Mineola. It's obviously a lot bigger than anything you've seen in Huntington, where a larger developer comes in and puts in, you know, 150 units. That's 3 blocks from a train station where many of the tenants can walk. But how are these meeting our needs? 63% of U.S. housing stock is single-family homes. You know, by 2030, 83% of our households, they estimate, are not going to have children, school-age children in them. So everyone, you know, single-family home is a great place to raise a family, but not that many households are actually families with kids. Locally in Huntington, only 37.5%, this is as of the last census, 2010, 37.5% of Huntington households are families with school-age children. It means about 2/3 of our households do not have school-age children, yet most of our housing stock are single-family homes. You know, it's the breakdown of single-person households, couples without children, non-family units. Yet our owner-occupied housing rate is 85%, which is, I would say, above the national average considerably, even though that doesn't match up with what our actual family diversity is. Hopefully this slide will advance shortly. So, you know, our current supply won't meet the upcoming demand, doesn't even meet our current demand. So missing middle housing is looking at these different types of housing that have been built traditionally in towns and cities across the country in the, you know, many part of the late 19th and early 20th century, pre-World War II. We produced a lot more different types of housing than we do post-World War II, where it was, large tracts of single-family homes or large apartment complexes. Looking at small duplexes or triplexes and sometimes courtyard apartments or bungalow courts, cottage courts, they also call them. Real, honest-to-goodness townhouses, not high-end condos called townhouses. And then small multiplex types of, small apartment buildings and live-work types of units. And then there's those mid-rise that, saw that Mineola example. The benefits of this is these smaller types of units give you more flexibility. You don't have to conglomerate, 2 acres worth of property in order to put in some units. You can finance them on a typical, regular mortgage. You don't need to get special sorts of financing for that. They can fit on small residential-sized lots, and many times they're good for these transition zones between where you've got the busy commercial downtown and then the single-family neighborhoods. They're kind of a good buffer transition between those two different types of neighborhoods. And I'm saying this as a designer, it's a lot easier to make a small building look good than a big building. It really is. Not to guarantee that every small building looks good, but it's a lot easier to achieve. And design is always something that a lot of people have concerns with when projects are proposed, that they don't fit the character of the community. So this is not all Long Island example, but that I believe is 4 units right there, but it looks like it could be a larger single-family home. And we have some of these here in Huntington. A lot of these examples, are from pre-World War II. These are 2 duplexes, and they were built as duplexes. They weren't single-family homes that were later converted. The one on the left is in the 1920s. This one, I'm not sure when it is. It looks a little earlier. But if you look at old Sears catalogs and that sort of thing with those old, they would sell house plans and kits for 2 families, 3 families, that sort of option. That was, it wasn't something that got retrofitted after the fact. It was a commonly built housing type. And both of these are, this one's right around the corner. That one's right near the village as well. I had to travel as far as Farmingdale Village to find these townhouses, which I tried to buy one. They're really hard to get. But these are traditional, they're built in 1911, traditional townhouses. Everyone you own from the sidewalk through your backyard. It's not a condominium type of thing, but your neighbors' houses are attached. These are a hot ticket to buy in Farmingdale. You're a block off of Main Street. You're right in the middle of the action, but you have your own private backyard. It's not an option that's easy to find on Long Island, but it has existed. This has been there for over 100 years. This is a 4-plex unit also in Huntington Village, just outside, walkable to the downtown part of Huntington. These are some slightly larger multiplex units. The one on the left, I believe, has 9 units in it. The one on the right, I think 7. Let me just double check. Oh, no, it's only 5 units, but it's a pretty small building. But these are, again, they're residential-looking, residential character, but they kind of provide a transition between a busy commercial downtown and a single-family residential neighborhood. And we have some, this slide's taking a little longer than anticipated. And then we have some modest-sized apartment buildings that were, again, built in the early 20th century. 14 units, that one. These have 6 units each. And these are great. They're right at the edges of town. They provide that buffer between the single-family neighborhoods and the busy, downtown that may be a little noisy at night. Maybe not the quiet neighborhood where you want to have raise your family. But then here we also have some new examples. Unfortunately, the weather and my schedule were not cooperating for me to get pictures because both of these have been built since these renderings were done. But these are the ones right on Nathan Hale, next to the co-ops off Oakwood. So what are the challenges? Zoning is a challenge. Right now it's hard to do these under current Huntington zoning. They do allow for some multifamily, but usually they require additional lot area, which makes it harder to find a lot where where it can fit. Parking is always an issue. And the previous panel talking about making sure that all the tenants have parking off-site, and if your apartment is in perhaps say Melville or Dix Hills where you have to drive everywhere, you're probably going to have a higher demand for cars than perhaps if you live right by the train station, where you might not need as much parking, or if you're walkable to a lot of places, you might only need 1 car for a couple because one takes the train to work. Sewers, these types of developments would need to be in sewered areas of the town, which again is another limiting factor. And just on Long Island, I mean Huntington in particular, but Long Island overall is just high construction costs and land costs, and that just drives up the cost of everything. But there are some opportunities for looking at some of these transitional neighborhoods, some of these perhaps maybe underutilized areas at the edges of downtowns. B streets are kind of like the back streets of a downtown. Like New York Ave and Main Street would be the A streets, whereas like maybe a Green Street or a New Street, that sort of thing, might be the B streets. They don't get as much traffic volume, that sort of thing. Near transit routes, making it easier for people to get around and not need a car. And in these downtown areas where places are more walkable and people don't need their cars as much, there's a lot of these smaller lots. You can't find a lot to build 100 units, but you might find 40 lots where you can build 4 units each. You know what I mean? It allows some more flexibility and creativity to be able to try to get more housing types and more housing things on the market, because it's again supply and demand. Right now, our supply of housing is not coming close to meeting our demand, which is part of what drives up our prices. So that's it. Nope, I have one more. Okay, and what do we need to make it work? Looking at the zoning, looking at streamlining the approval process, like the supervisor was talking about earlier. That sounds like a great thing. Having worked for an architecture firm and tried to get permits through the town, it's always a challenge. It takes a while. Looking at parking requirements and places where transit is a viable option, looking at maybe not requiring quite so much space for parking. Incentives for building in affordable units, and then looking at design standards to improve the quality of design to make sure that these types of units do fit the character of the neighborhood. So that's it.
Alyssa gave you a lot of the great detail about creating affordable housing options, but at the 50,000 foot level, it starts in 2 places: the builder and the community. When you're working with builders, they'll always tell you the project has to pencil. The project has to pencil. What does that mean? That means that when you take out your pencil and you write down all your costs, your land, your materials, your labor, and you write down any concessions that you may have gotten, whether it's IDA or from the local government or the state, and you get to your bottom line, do you come out with a number that gets you some profit? Does it pencil? Does the project pencil? If it doesn't pencil, they're not going to do the project. If it does pencil, then you deal with the community. And the community, because most of us on Long Island are used to single-family home environments. And so there are a lot of people that push back on anything other than that, meaning multifamily, meaning apartments. And so there's that push and pull between those two. But let me tell you, there are success stories out there. There are definitely success stories. From 2012 to 2017, I represented the town of Huntington as outside counsel for real estate. And I worked with the CDA. And you heard Supervisor Lupinacci talk about a success story, and that is Columbia Terrace. Columbia Terrace, we worked on that for years to make it pencil first, and then to get all the financing in place to get the job done. There were grants from the state. The Town of Huntington Affordable Housing Board gave some money that's going to come back to them. There were concessions from the town. But at the end of the day, the project did pencil. And those 14 units are truly affordable. You've got 6 one-bedrooms and 8 two-bedrooms. The one-bedrooms will be sold for $185,000. The 2-bedrooms will be sold for $215,000. That's affordable. In terms of home ownership, that's affordable. And that's right here in Huntington. So it can be done. It can. Oh, one other thing that we wrangle with, the unions. That was a big issue because that goes into the cost. So, but it can be done. It can be done. On the multifamily side, we're going to have to get creative and recognize that the pockets of need are on the 2 ends of the spectrum that I talked about, young people and older people, okay? And so we're going to have to get creative thinking about, you've heard in the city, there's the 80-20 rule in terms of development. You know, if you're going to build a new development, apartment building, 80% can be market and 20% can be reserved for affordable housing. Well, if we couple that with affordable for people under the age of, and with an income under, and people over the age of with an income under, that's something that can work, provided that it pencils, right? Provided that it pencils. But those are the types of things that we need to encourage our local government to work with our state government and any pockets of money that are out there, because they are out there. But you've got to find them, you've got to write the grants, proposals, and so forth. You've got to follow it through. But though it can happen. It's happening now in our town, so it can happen again.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, so we have 2 questions. This is for Barry. How long is the waiting list for Authority Affordable Units? Housing Authority?
For Housing
For Authority Affordable Units?
Housing Authority. The Housing Authority maintains a list for housing. I would say that, and it opens and then it closes, but right now I would say the waiting list is upwards of a year. Upwards of a year.
Okay, and then there was another question. I don't think it's for this panel, but I want to read and put it on record, and perhaps we could get back to these people. It's probably more for the supervisor. It says, why does the town allow parents or Huntington residents to apply for affordable homes when the parents have never lived in Huntington? So, I don't understand the question.
Well, the thing is, it depends on the lottery, okay? So for instance, Columbia Terrace the lottery is going to start with Huntington veterans. And if in fact there are not enough Huntington veterans that meet the income requirements to make their purchases to be affordable housing purchasers, then we go to Long Island veterans. Okay, so it depends on what that lottery this person is talking about. If it's restricted to Huntington residents, then I agree. Yeah. The parents of Huntington residents are not Huntington residents and should not apply. However, it could be that the definition of the lottery includes family of Huntington residents. But if it's restricted to Huntington residents, then no. Then parents who live outside of Huntington should not be eligible for that lottery. Thank you, Barry.
Any more questions for anybody?
Yeah, is it possible to get a grant or write a grant to convert an existing single-family home to a 4-unit residence?
Grants.
I don't know of any grants available. But the financing I was talking about was just a standard, the same type of mortgage that you would use for a house, you could use for up to a 4-unit building. Even you can allow for a little bit of commercial, if there's a small commercial bit on the first floor. But it allows you, it's easier financing and I believe better rates than if you were trying to go for, building a 20-unit building or something. Then you have to go to a different type of lender and different type of
because
financing.
When you stay with 4 units, you're still in the residential lending.
Right.
Different terms, better rates. The minute you start adding a store, it becomes multiple use. Then you add in the commercial requirements for borrowing from banks and also from town permits. So it's a whole different spectrum. Then you have different type of architectural drawings, different approvals. So you have commercial and residential components. The lending, it's a little bit different than when you're just dealing with residential.
I would say a good source of information for your question is the CDA, the Community Development Agency in Town Hall, because their mission is to restore housing stock in Huntington. They are charged with dealing with blighted homes. They have had in the past a Take Back the Block program where they get grants to take over homes that are zombie homes or what have you and refurbish them, rehabilitate them. And they use grant money. They're constantly, the former executive director, Joan Circle, who's now town councilwoman, was constantly writing grants, proposals for just that sort of thing. And so I would say that that would be a great source of information.
We have a lot of resources in the town people are just not aware of. Even when being in the business world, and my customers ask me questions about investment in Huntington, buying business in Huntington, I always refer them to town hall, because each town has different codes, different restriction, and the last thing you want is somebody get into a contract that they can't get out because the town cannot help them. And again, the process, how long does it take? Is this a project that's going to be done in a year, or is the project going to go be 3-5 years down the road? So my advice is to everyone even here, it's always to go to the town, go to the right departments, ask the questions. The information is there, it's just that we don't take advantage of it. And you know, our town, I've dealt with them, they're very open, they give you different resources, they tell you where to get the information if they don't have it, so you're always going to be able to find the answer. Sometimes we don't like the answer, you know.
But you don't get the answer.
But if you don't ask, you don't know if you have the right answer or the wrong answer. So thank you, Barry, Alyssa, Trudy. If anybody has any more questions or you want to talk afterward, and thank you for coming by and being part of our community. And personally, I want to thank you for staying involved and contributing to, I guess it's one of the best towns that we live in, and to stay here. So thank you.
You know, when we talk about affordable housing, we often hear about how residents don't want Huntington to look like Queens. And so in order to give you a feel for what modern day affordable housing looks like, we worked with Councilman Mark Cuthbertson, and Mark has produced a short film. Mark has been a member of the town council since 1998. He has had a significant impact on the town, including the preservation of open space and bringing high-paying jobs to Huntington with companies like Canada and Ruby's Costumes. Here to introduce the film is Councilman Mark Cuthbertson.
Thank you, Roger. I'll tell you, this is, for me, was a little bit of a labor of love. It's about affordable housing. An area that I've been involved with in many facets over the years, and more recently I actually represent someone in a lawsuit in federal court on affordable housing. And I went to my associate attorney who works in my office, and I said to him, listen, we really need to find an argument that supports a point that we're going to make in this case. Can you go and find that proposition in the case law? And he came back the next day and he said, boss, I've got good news and bad news. He said, the good news is we got a case that covers the point you wanted to make exactly. He said, the bad news is that you were a named defendant in that lawsuit, and it's your alleged discrimination that formed the fact pattern for so, you know, life really came full circle where I could take you know, my activities on the town board and use them to benefit a client. I'll say, just as an aside, the lawsuit itself was about a senior assisted living facility, Sunrise, on Deer Park Avenue, that actually was eventually built. I'll tell you, just a disclaimer, Steven Spielberg has nothing to worry about. I would much rather have done a documentary or a short, because this is all 12 minutes, about the Housing Help case, because I think it's far more interesting. Housing Help is a development that's never been built at the corner of Elwood and Pulaski, and I think it would make a far more interesting case, but since it hasn't been built, it'd be kind of hard to, you know, rehash that. This video itself takes a look at two more recent projects, Avalon Bay and Highland Greens. Highland Greens we called Ruland Road at the time. It is what I would describe as a very primitive and sort of 20,000-foot view of the concerns expressed. And because for me, I would have loved to take a more of a deep dive. And in the last session, listening to Emily Rogan as school board member and Eric as an advocate, they really started to delve into a lot of the details that went into the Avalon project. And I think there's so much that can be gleaned from a process like that. You know, there are the speeches of people at public hearings, the school board interaction, the town board interaction, and the social media that Eric alluded to, the people sitting in their underwear at 2 o'clock in the morning and weighing in on a project. But there's so much that can be gleaned. You know, I was at Canon a few weeks ago, and they were previewing this technology. They have this, and it's, you know, artificial intelligence that takes thousands of hours of surveillance and closed circuit video, and within seconds you can search for a car, a pedestrian, and all of those things. You can take all those data points and condense them and synthesize them and come up with an intelligent conclusion. And I do look forward to a time where you could take a process like the Avalon process or an affordable housing project process and synthesize it and try and come up with what the issues are. For me, the issue always comes down to, you know, what are the well-founded concerns that are expressed versus the unsubstantiated fears. You know, we just came off a national election where, you know, you have a debate over whether pre-existing medical conditions were going to be taken away from you. Is that a well-founded fear, or was that a unsubstantiated fear? Let me tip my hand, and I think it was an unsubstantiated fear. I think it was a scare tactic, just like I thought there wasn't a group of marauding immigrants who were going to breach the border and ruin our sovereignty in the country. But that's what we have very often. Is it a well-founded concern or an unsubstantiated fear? We see it in the village nowadays, and we have challenges as a town because we compete with the cities now. And if there was any takeaway from last week that really stayed with me was Amazon, right? I mean, we have in Amazon, they made a decision, a very comprehensive decision that they took a lot of time to think about, to locate 25,000 people in Long Island City. And it really reinforces something that my former colleague, town board colleague, Steve Israel, when he was in Congress talked about, was the United States Department of Commerce has said that there is a migration to the cities now. And Amazon's decision really reinforces that. So what are we as suburbs doing to continue to attract people who want to live in downtown areas and things like that? But I've digressed long enough. I want to thank Michelle Martinez, my legislative aide, who helped put this together, Ethan Sand, who's our video person, Matt Whalen and Chris Capice from Avalon, Peter Flory from DNF Development, Matt Harris, Dick Kubek, and Roger Weaving, all of whom were civic activists involved in the process, and they had, you know, they were very helpful in terms of the interviews that they put together and were a part of this process. And I thank you all for being here. And again, I don't think any filmmaker has any fears based on this, but it's a start and a look, and maybe we can build upon it. So go ahead. Affordable housing and the need for a diverse housing stock have been a topic of many discussions on Long Island. Long Island's housing needs are not what they were 50 years ago. The model of a community composed entirely of single-family homes is being challenged by many, such as young people that are just entering the workforce and empty nesters who either want a different lifestyle or cannot afford a home of their own. But this shift has not been without its tensions and debate. Two Huntington projects, the 379-unit Avalon Bay rental community on 5th Street in Huntington Station, and the 117-unit Highland Green Limited Equity Cooperative in Melville, shine a lens on the many facets of the affordable housing debate in Huntington. The needs, the solutions, and the reasons behind the controversy.
This piece of property was originally zoned for single-family homes. Honestly, it was really a conversation that I had with Supervisor Patron years ago when we were first looking at this site, and his desire to do something different than the traditional single-family home development, which is appropriate in many circumstances, but does not provide the diversity of housing choices that we were trying to accomplish, and that the supervisor thought that the town needed to really provide those housing choices for all the residents of the town of Huntington.
You were a part of the Avalon approval as an advocate for an affordable housing component on that, because as we know, the majority of the units at Avalon are market rate rental housing. But what was that process like, and what do you recall?
It was 2 years of intense conflict, and it came out of, I think, an understandable fear from some of the residents of Huntington Station, which for many, many years had been the area where most of the affordable housing was built. As we went through the process, we tried to keep their concerns in mind, and we even refigured our own messaging and realized that this was not just about housing. This was an economic development issue. So that when you talk about Avalon Bay, as we did, we shifted our own messaging from we need affordable housing to we need the economic revitalization of Huntington Station.
The great thing about working for a company like we do is we have actual school children data, and we're able to provide that to the school districts as we go through this process. And we did the same thing here. And many had projections of up to 500 school children coming out of this development. And at the end of the day, from year to year, our school children impact is anywhere from 40 to 70 kids.
It didn't create the amount of problems for the school district as we had expected, which is good. I think much like the Avalon in Melville, it probably has a lot of non-custodial single parents. So we didn't get nearly as many kids as we thought we would.
So Rulin Road, speak to that process. You said 15 years, which we all recognize and recognized at that press conference that I recall. What was that process like?
Pretty much the same. Local fears that the wrong kind of people are going to come in, the wrong kind of architecture is going to stare us in the face every morning when we get up. It's going to add to the children in the Dixhill School District. It's going to add to traffic. But in the end, I remember that last meeting in this room, just so many people getting up and saying, whoa, kind of what you said. What is this all about? We've seen the plans, we've looked at the building, we've seen what's happened with Avalon, very few kids. Now, why are we so nervous about Rulin? It's going to be the same deal. And sure enough, it was.
And I think what finally was the tipping point on Rulin Road, and to former Supervisor Patron's credit, was his concept of a co-op with a small type of ownership component to it. Because that's always, I think, what we hear a lot of is, you know, renters are not invested in the community. They don't care as much as owners. I don't necessarily buy that, but it was a way to bridge the gap and an olive branch that I think the supervisor employed there.
The residents can get entry into the project without putting large amounts of money down where they are shareholders in a cooperative corporation. Well, the concern was that we were going to be overrun, that we had 117 units, and that there were going to be hundreds of children here. And the reality was that right now, our records indicate we have about 29 children that are attending local schools.
Really, at the end of the day, it's more for your child. You want to put them in a place that they're secure, they can go to school, and all the resources are available for them. So this is definitely a spectacular opportunity for me.
Dick, can you speak to the need for a diversity of housing stock, both in the town and in the region?
We have a younger population now, very often burdened with college debt, marrying later, having children later, who really aren't quite ready for the single-family model, the 90%. You also have a growing senior population that wants to stay on Long Island, but don't want to stay in single-family homes. The other problem we have, and it's a very serious one, is that our housing stock is so expensive that you have it more and more unaffordable. So we are losing folks. So we have to rethink the model. The 90% has been great. Raising kids, a single family home is great, but it's not for everybody, and I think we need to recognize that.
What are the challenges that you've seen to workforce or affordable housing, whatever you call it, the one that's going to fill that niche where people can't make it into a market house and affordable units are there and getting approved?
I think the main barrier we have is that fear that we're going to have these high-rise, low-income housing complexes that will flood us with kids, raise our taxes, bring all kinds of traffic, and turn us into this sort of crowded, semi-slum New York City outlying or region. None of that is true.
What are the type of numbers that you've seen in the lottery system? What is the need and how is it reflected in that lottery?
Yeah, I think the lottery system is a good indicator of what the demand really is for these affordable homes. When you have a lottery, we literally have hundreds of people apply to be the winner of that lottery to get an affordable home. We recently did one for one house, and there was 400 people. There were 400 people applying for that house. But it really gives you a feel for the number of people that really need an affordable home.
Because there's such a big demand for this type of housing and for the affordability levels that exist here, there was a lottery system that was set up, and it was done in conjunction with the town of Huntington, with the Long Island Housing Partnership, and the New York State Homes and Community Renewal, which is the housing agency that was involved in assisting in funding for this project. There were over 700 applications that we received for 117 units. So it was a very significant number of folks that were interested in getting occupancy here.
I remember the first year that I did this, around 2000 or thereabouts. I remember Councilman Israel, who would become our congressman, saying, "Where are the supporters of affordable housing?" I think in these years, through public education, through organizing, through recognizing the need, through good media, through good policies, through good creation of good-looking housing like Avalon Bay, we've shifted. And so it's a little easier now than it was in the beginning when I got involved, but we still have work to do because 70% of the Long Islanders recognize the need for affordable housing. And I'm thinking as an advocate, well, that's good. But 60% said, not in my neighborhood. So that's the moment of truth, when you come into Dix Hills, where I live, and you say, listen, we have this idea. Those prejudices, those fears, those stereotypes are still going to rise up to the surface. But it's not really as wild as it had been 20 years ago. We've made progress, but we have work to do.
This cannot be a one community issue. When you put too many low-income people in one community, such as Huntington Station, that has been done over the last 40 or 50 years, especially with the urban renewal, you create a whole set of problems that are unintended. I'm not a big over fan of government intrusion in markets, but this is one where really the government is almost the only answer. There's a limited amount of land, there's strong demand, there's a lot of news right now about how market rate houses get snapped up in a day. There's a lot of demand even for market rate housing. So the prices of the land, the prices of the houses are only going to go up. And the only way we're going to be able to create or preserve affordable housing is if the government takes a role in it.
There is such a demand for market rate housing that no developer in the world who's acting in his self-interest, which he should, and who's driven by a profit motive and maybe investors, is ever going to fill that need unless it's really an act of charity, which you don't see a lot of that.
Well, businesses aren't in the business of giving their money away, so they have to be able to at least break even, and that requires some kind of intervention. There are certainly things that don't involve money that could be done, improving and streamlining the process. is one, the work that we do, reducing the amount of opposition in the community. Every year that a project drags on, when somebody's trying to build an affordable unit, costs them more money. That has to be factored into the money that they have to recover. So the less opposition there is, the more smoothly things will run. And that's one of the things that we do at the Housing Coalition, is try to get the word out there that these things are needed, that they can look nice, that they are not a detriment to the community, and that you know, we should be encouraging them rather than trying to discourage them. Here we go. Okay, good. So, thank you again to Councilman Cuthbertson for that film. They need the theater. They need the theater, so I have a couple last-minute comments here. Listen, you know, these things wouldn't end without a call to action, and so we put it, you know, we don't email you often, but when we do, we ask that you act. It's usually to show up at town hall on an issue or to write to the council people. Write to your town council people. They do listen. They don't always agree, but they do listen. Our next public meeting for the Huntington Township Housing Coalition is on November 26th at noon at the Harbor Fields Library. We hold them every other month, and we hope to see some of you there. Also, stay engaged in your civic activity. The Community Conversations program is largely run by Leadership Huntington and our libraries, who I believe I was remiss in talking about earlier, especially the folks from the Half Hollow Hills Library and the Town of Huntington Public Library right down here downtown. They'll probably be running a program in the spring, not on housing, on a different issue. So stay engaged, and thank you for your time. Have a good day.